The middle of summer is a quiet time in the Dynasty calendar. There's not a lot of news for us to work with, and that's a massive driver of Dynasty trades. So you might feel a little bit stuck right now, unsatisfied with your roster, but not really sure how to improve it. In today's video, I'll give you an inside look at my trade strategies so that you can get some more deals done in your leagues and hopefully hit the ground running in 2024 with a championship caliber roster.
What? What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Now, before we get started today, I want to let you know that you can get 10% off any plan at fantasypoints.com/plans if you use my promo code PURE10. There are great plans available if you like college football or DFS, but my personal favorite is the Fantasy Points Data Suite. This is an incredible resource for any fantasy manager looking up their game. It's my first place that I go when I'm trying to do research for a video or just for my own personal leagues. The Data Suite has a ton of advanced stats, and all of them can be filtered by things like field position, down and distance, game situation, so you can find insights that might be otherwise overlooked. So if you're interested in getting the Fantasy Points Data Suite or any of the other plans that Fantasy Points has available, go to the website fantasypoints.com/plans and use my code PURE10 for 10% off. All right, as we get into it here, let me start by saying that at the highest level, there are really two keys to making more dynasty trades, which are being flexible and being creative. So let's start by exploring those two ideas. When I say being flexible, I mean opening yourself up to more trade possibilities. You should be willing to trade for a lot of players. There are far too many managers that view Dynasty as a binary game, like I want this player or I don't want this player. In reality, Dynasty is a value game. And for the most part, you should be willing to roster just about any player if the price is right. What you don't want to do is eliminate totally viable trade options and shrink the player pool unnecessarily. That's going to make it a lot harder to make deals if you're crossing out a lot of players in the player pool because you simply don't like that player. You don't think they're going to succeed. No matter how good you are at player takes, the reality is you're just not going to get all of them right. You're not going to get even close to all of them right. So that's something that I have worked on season after season, being more humble. And I have hard stances on what I'm willing to pay for a player, but what I view as a good or a bad acquisition really comes down to the price that I'm paying. And by the same token, you should be willing to trade away pretty much any player on your roster. If you take all your good players and you make those off limits in your trade negotiations, you're not going to get anything done. You're not going to be able to just scrape up loose change from your bench and turn that into valuable players. You have to be willing to give in order to get. So that's another thing about being flexible. I know it's easy to get attached to the players on your roster, especially when you only have, a handful of dynasty teams, even one dynasty team. You might feel very attached to that player that you drafted as a rookie. Maybe you've held on to them. But ultimately, the best way that you can open yourself up to more trade possibilities is to make those players available to managers that might actually value them more than you do. You also have to avoid this trap called the endowment effect, which is this principle that we value things that belong to us more simply because they belong to us. So that's something that applies to all areas of life, really, but especially in Dynasty, you have to fight against that impulse to think your players are more valuable because they're on your roster already. Put yourself in the other manager's shoes and think, what would you actually give up to get this player if you didn't already have them? So that's being flexible. When I say being creative, what I mean is different trade structures, different possible types of trades. Don't get one idea of what you want to accomplish with a trade in your head and then try to force that square peg into a round hole. It's possible that your perfect type of trade that you think will make your team better just isn't available in your league. There are a lot of different ways to structure a trade. And as you open your mind up to more and more possibilities, you'll be able to send better offers. You'll be able to counter other people's offers in a way that is productive for both sides. So being creative is another big part of the process. Now, to keep this video from being too theoretical, we are going to go ahead and take a look at one of my actual rosters where I have a need at running back, and we're going to try to solve that problem by putting some trades together. So I'm going to put my roster up on the screen here, and this one is coming out of a bit of a rebuild. I'm ready to push the chips in a little bit. I'm ready to get back into the playoff mix this season, but I have a big need at running back. Jahmyr Gibbs is my only real starting caliber running back at the position. If the season started today, I would have Ray Davis in the RB2 spot, which just isn't a real recipe for success. So with this particular roster, I've got at quarterback Kyler Murray, Drake May, and Deshaun Watson. At running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, Ray Davis, Will Shipley, and a couple of other roster cloggers. At wide receiver, I have Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Rome Odunze, Tank Dell, Lad McConkey, Curtis Samuel, Jacob Cowing, and Jalen Tolbert. At tight end, Trey McBride, Kyle Pitts, Mike Gesicki, and Colby Parkinson. And then over on the right side of this graphic, I have my rookie picks. Like I said, I'm coming out of a rebuild here, so I do have a surplus of picks to work with at the moment. I've got 3 firsts in 2025. I've got an extra second, a couple of extra thirds, and I have all of my 2026 and 2027 picks. So before you go out and try to make these deals, it is a good idea to kind of catalog what you have available to you. You don't have to go and type your team into a spreadsheet. I just did that so you could see it better. But looking at what resources you have to offer another manager, that's going to help you find a good starting point. With this particular setup, it would make sense for me to trade one of my 2 tight ends. I don't necessarily need to have 2 star tight ends, especially since it's a non-premium league. I also have extra rookie picks, so that would be a good place to look for a potential deal. And I could deal one of my deeper wide receivers as well, like Lad McConkey or Curtis Samuel. Now, remember, none of my players are off limits. So if somebody comes back and they want to build a deal around a Jalen Waddle or a Garrett Wilson or Deshaun Watson or whoever, I'm going to entertain that. But it does make sense to start with the assets you're most comfortable sending away. In fact, I'd even be open to trading away Jahmyr Gibbs in some kind of a trade that brings me extra running backs. Maybe I get 2 running backs in return. I'd be fine with that. I'm not so attached to having Gibbs on my team. Now, once I've really familiarized myself with my roster, what am I working with? I have to turn my attention to the other teams in my league. So I need to go and see which managers might make the most logical trade partners. If I'm looking for a running back, which teams have the most running backs? Well, I went and looked at the other managers in the league, and I found some that had a real surplus at running back. There are 2 different teams that actually have 7 running backs valued in the top 40 on Dynasty Data Lab, and there's another manager that has 5. So that seems like the best place to start, where they're probably interested in offloading some of that roster value at running back and improving at another position. I also went ahead and looked at the trade block, which, depending on your league, that might mean nothing, but it could be a place to start. I found James Cook, Devin Singletary, James Conner, Rashad White, and Ramondre Stevenson also on the trade block, in addition to those other teams that I mentioned from before. So there's a ton of running backs that I can look at all different value levels, all the way up to the Bijan Robinson types, all the way down to the kind of fill-in guys like a Devin Singletary. So obviously at this point, I could put together, if you take all the combinations of players I could trade away, players I could trade for, we're talking, thousands of possible trades. But I'm going to go ahead and put a few together that are all different structures that I can then walk through here so you can see what types of deals would I consider to handle this hole in my roster right now. So the first of these offers is pretty much the simplest one that you can send out. Just a pick for a player straight up. I offered a 2025 second for Joe Mixon. I could have picked any of a dozen running backs for this. I just chose Mixon because of the guys that I thought were in that value range. He's the one I preferred by a little bit. Now, if this offer gets rejected, I can offer a little bit more, or I could go send out, again, another offer to another manager, sending a second straight up for a running back. That is the easiest way to solve the problem, especially since I have an extra second already. This next trade, I decided to target James Cook because this manager had him on the block. They looked like they were on the verge of a rebuild. They already have some extra future picks. They've got a lot of young players on their team. So I'm thinking they might not really be in the mix this year. And if so, they don't really have a need for these running backs. So in this offer, I would be getting James Cook and Devin Singletary, sending away a couple of second round picks. And I just threw in Jalen Tolbert. Maybe they want a 4th instead. Maybe they want a different player off my bench. That's fine. I think this is a good starting point for this offer. The way I see it, James Cook worth a little bit more than a second, or worth more than a second, but less than a first. I think Devin Singletary probably worth a little bit less than a random second. And so this feels like at least a good starting point where we could negotiate a little bit and get something done here. I would then have 2 extra running backs to pair with Jahmyr Gibbs, have a little bit of depth at the position. In this third trade, I'm getting one of my 2 tight ends involved here. The manager that I'm offering this trade to, their best tight end is Pat Freiermuth. So I'm thinking maybe they want an upgrade. Maybe they don't value the position because it's a non-tight end premium. Maybe they're not a Kyle Pitts believer. I don't know until I send the offer. But for somebody that is a Kyle Pitts believer, I think that this trade definitely makes some sense. So I would be getting Pacheco and a first. The other team would be getting Ray Davis, Kyle Pitts, and a second. So I'm turning a second into a first, but taking a hit on value at the tight end to turn that into Pacheco. So I think both teams can win here, depending on how you value these assets. And again, it's a little bit of a different structure. I'm trying to fill a need on their team. I'm getting a running back, and then the pick swap is kind of trying to even out the value a little bit. And with this fourth and final trade, I decided to swing big. There aren't a lot of running backs that I'm eager to trade away first round picks for, but Bijan Robinson's absolutely one of them. He's my Dynasty RB1. So I decided to package together a bunch of picks here along with Curtis Samuel, see if I could pry Bijan away from this other manager who does actually have Breece Hall as well. So I could have sent the same offer for Breece Hall, but I figured this would be another option. If I couldn't buy any of those lower tier running backs for a reasonable price, I could really go all in on a Bijan type. Not my ideal route because having that much value tied up in Bijan and Gibbs isn't really how I like to build teams. But again, this is all about being flexible, being creative. And so this is just another way that I could solve the problem. The ultimate offer comes out to Curtis Samuel, a first, 2 seconds, and a third for Bijan Robinson. Looking at it now, I think that might be a little bit light. Maybe swap the third out for another future second, something like that. But at least it's enough offered on that side that maybe they do look at it, and it opens up a negotiation as well. Now, this should go without saying, but if you send out a bunch of initial offers and nobody bites on them, you can always follow up with those managers, send them a direct message, see if they are interested in different players on your team that you didn't send, or let them know if you're willing to offer more than you did initially. I don't subscribe to this idea that you have to send your absolute best final offer in the first go around. I think you should send a reasonable offer, an offer that at least gets your foot in the door. But it's okay if you're willing to come up on price a little bit and let them know that. But again, the key, circling back to the beginning here, is looking at all the teams in the league and seeing all these different possible ways that you can solve a problem. Different creative ways. Trade for a high-end running back, trade for more of a rental guy, trade for 2 running backs using one valuable asset. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And you just have to open up your mind a little bit to the possibilities. But I think if you do that, even now in the summer, you can get more trades done and you can improve your team heading into week 1. That's going to do it for today's video. If you remember to stay creative, stay flexible in your trade negotiations, I'm sure you'll be getting more deals done in no time. Don't forget to subscribe to the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. And remember that you can use my code PURE10 for 10% off any plan at fantasypoints.com/plan. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.